Would you please help me welcome to the stage from Columbus, Ohio, Tuesday Ryan Hart.
I totally want to shake your hand, and I need the clicker. So Joe may have taken more time, but I actually may need to take less time because he said a lot of what I think. I feel a little bit like I'm just going to be up here being Joe's hype man. Yeah, that's right, go. But I'm going to share a few things with you today. My name is Tuesday Ryan Hart. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I am from Columbus, Ohio. That's where I've lived the past 20-ish years, but I grew up in rural Iowa and rural Ohio, and a big portion of my work in the last 6 years has been in rural Ohio working on hunger. And so really pleased to be here with you all today, share some of what I know. I always like to start by saying, I know some stuff, but it's not the truth with a capital T, and that's not to diminish my credibility. It's to give you all space to hear what I'm going to bring and then make it your own. You need to, if something lands for you, great. Make it your truth with a capital T. You don't have to just swallow mine. So I want to tell you a little bit about my work, and then we are going to talk about, the title of this talk is Shared Work, Collaborating for Today. And I wanted to bring that because I think collaboration today is actually quite different than it was 15 years ago when I started doing task forces and convening committees and running meetings. It's different now. Today is different. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work, and then I'm going to tell you why collaborating is different today, and then we're going to go into some pieces around how we need to be thinking about that difference in collaboration. So this is up here to share a little bit about the work I do, just to give you some sense of that. And this signpost is in the middle, and this says lost, confused, unsure, unclear, perplexed, disoriented, and bewildered. And that's in the center because I don't work with anyone who isn't feeling that way. I always say, if you know what to do, you don't hire me, right? Just go do it. Just great, fantastic. But if you are up against a system or an issue in your community or in your organization that actually we don't know what to do, we've never faced this before, then that's where my work happens to come in. So these are some of the folks I work with, just to give you some idea of kind of what's up. These folks in the top right, and I'm going to talk about them quite a bit, these folks in the top right are working on municipal modernization in Nova Scotia, which is a province of about 1 million people, where the rural communities total in the province is 1 million, and the rural communities for the past 70 years have started dying off. 70 years ago, there was a report put out that said if we do not shift the structure of our municipality, our towns are going to start dying. 70 years later, the structure hasn't been changed, and indeed, the towns are going bankrupt, infrastructure is leaving, people are unclear what to do, and we are in an impending crisis. And so this group of 12 people, and I'm going to talk more about them, decided we're going to try something. We're going to do something about municipal modernization in our province. So that's kind of part of what I do. These folks down here work in equity and justice in independent schools in the United States. So they work all across the US, but they're all incredibly isolated. They're like the one practitioner in their entire school. They're the only person who does what they do in their school community. And so once a year they come together to learn from each other, right? And they're furthering equity and justice in schools. I don't think I'm gonna do top right. These folks right here, these folks who are doing the crazy arms, they're working on sport across the province, and they know that they have to increase access to make sport available to citizens. They know that sport can be a way of making change in communities, and they know that they haven't figured out how to work together to do that yet. Bottom right, that's the hunger work I'm doing. So we've done, in 6 years, we've done 19 counties in Ohio, all rural, and they're looking at how do they actually address hunger, right? What does it look like as a community to take on hunger and then move forward? And then that bottom. I can't pronounce it because that's Swedish, but that means all together. And so another bit of work I'm doing is in child welfare in Sweden. How working with a city in Sweden, right? We all think Sweden has this amazing welfare system where everyone is happy and no one goes without. They have a 30% child poverty rate, right? And so they're looking at how to address that. I bring these things up because it's happening everywhere. People need to know how to become shapers everywhere I'm working, right? So whether it has rural is a big component, these municipality folks, our hunger work, the sport folks, those all have a deep component of rural and a rural-urban divide that's impacting them, or not. These issues, this way of needing to collaborate differently is happening all over the world. And so we have to begin to think about what we're doing. It is not enough to simply say, well, we're just gonna try harder at what we know to do. We have to begin to turn to each other in a different way. So, why I think collaboration is different today. Ooh. Let's try again. All right. You are being asked to do more with less. How many people are being asked to do more work with less resources? Raise your hand. Right? So a good portion of us, right, are being tasked with more and more mandate and less resourcing. The only answer to that, when we are stretched thin, is to turn to each other, right? And the way, right, that we have historically turned to each other in the past is a funder says you have to collaborate, and so we get MOUs and we say, okay, we're gonna collaborate, and that means you're gonna come to my meeting and I'm gonna come to your meeting, and then we'll sign off on a grant and that'll be fantastic. That is insufficient, right? It no longer can one organization do more with less, even if their partners have signed off. We have to turn to each other. The issues that are facing us, the issues that Joe mentioned, are getting more and more complex, and we cannot solve them alone. The speed and rate of change is accelerating. What I mean by the speed and the rate is that change is coming at us quicker and quicker. And then when we're in the midst of change, it's happening faster and faster. So it's coming at us quicker, and we're actually having to change more rapidly as well. We were working to redesign our homelessness response system in my community, and one of the providers said, oh, can't we just stop for a minute? Can't we just have 6 months where this is our system and this is what we're doing? And the funding organization's response was nope, we cannot stop. There are still homeless people. There's still people dying on our streets. There's still people who don't have access to resources. We actually can't stop. And so we know that rate of change is likely not going to decrease, right? Where we are right now, with the amount of information coming at us, there have been a few studies done, our brains actually cannot handle the rate of change we are at. The acceleration in technology, what it has given us, the access to new information and new people, our brains actually can't work with it. It's too much for one human brain. So we have to have 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 or 15 or 1,500 human brains working with what's coming down the pike. Because your brain can see part of it, and my brain can see part of it, and your brain can see part of it, and you can work with part of it. Our brains aren't meant to work with this rate of change. The only hope we have is together. Now, we'll probably evolve and get there, but until we do, we have to turn to each other. Also, collaboration is different today because we have increased connection, and our demographics are shifting, right? Populations are getting older. New folks are coming into our communities. Certain ages are leaving our communities. Demographics are shifting. And the increased connection that technology allows can be fantastic. We can use that, but it can also really lead to increased isolation, right? Because now, Tuesday Reinhardt, who is a black, white, biracial woman who likes to run and has 2 children and doesn't like cheese, can find 1,800 other people like that online, right? Whereas before, I would have had to actually talk with people who liked cheese. I don't understand you people, but before I would have had to talk with you. Now, I can just go into my corner and only talk to people who think like me, right? There aren't a whole lot of cheese haters in the world, just to say we're a small but vocal group, but we're finding each other. So this actually is an opportunity, right? This increased connection, the shifting demographics, that is an opportunity for us to turn toward each other, but we have to, it's not a given. That technology connects us more, that shifting demographics make us have to move out of our comfort zone is not a given. We have more capacity now to move back into our comfort zones than we ever have had. Now, that will be the death knell of us, right? It's not a long-term solution, but instead, we actually could choose to turn toward each other. That's much more possible now, and actually we don't have the ability to work with just our folks if we're going to be even place-based. So Joe made a really good case for this earlier, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But, sorry about that, we're going to get there. Why shared work? And so, this is called shared work, collaboration for today. I believe that the thing that will drive our collaborations is the work that's in front of us, right? I have been in planning for a really long time, and I loved that quote that we heard from Maslow around, like, we can feel guilty about the past, we can feel anxious about the future. The only place we can act from is the present, right? I believe that communities find themselves and find the ability to be well together through their work, right? That actually getting to work helps us figure things out, right? And so shared vision, I think Joe made the case really well. It's impossible, and I actually think it's pretty problematic. When I have been in rooms where we share vision, two things happen. Well, sometimes people just get so tired of talking about the words. They're just like, whatever, we know what we're going to do. But two things that really exclude people happen. One is that we come up with a vision that is kind of so bland and so, of course, that people don't see the action behind it. So for example, sometimes we'll come up with a vision as like, for the children, right? Well, look, I think that's fantastic. Everyone in this room could say we will do things for the children. That doesn't tell us a whole lot about what we want to do. It also doesn't tell us what to do if I don't believe my children have the same value as your children, right? It's actually not, it just kind of becomes a blanket, meaningless kind of vision statement. Or maybe 2/3 of the room agrees with a vision, but a third doesn't. And so that third, it often has really important things to say about why that shouldn't be the vision. But we're kind of so going forward on the vision that we kind of lose a third of the people, right? And I've seen that time and time again. And I would say, and Joe mentioned to you that equity is important to my work, it's central to my work, that often the people we lose with vision are those that are the most marginalized anyway, right? The ones that don't have as much voice anyway. And so they're not seeing the same vision. And I also just think, like, we don't need that. We actually don't need that. Shared analysis is time-consuming and undesirable. So for me, if shared vision is looking forward and we can feel anxious about that, shared analysis is often looking backwards, right? And we can spend forever analyzing what to do. It is not that I'm against analysis. I just don't think that I've never been in a room where data made the difference on whether we were going to do something or not, right? I've been in lots of rooms where we asked for more data before we decided what we were going to do, but we know what to do. That municipalities project has had 70 years of data, and they still haven't moved on it. It is not enough. It can support our efforts. It needs to be there. Data is an important part of our work, but it can take often we're like, well, we're just going to find out a little bit more before we get started, right? And that little bit more comes into next year, and then 3 years from now, and then 5 years from now. And then we have a report from 25 years ago that is the exact same thing we're doing today. And actually, I think a shared analysis is undesirable, because if we all think the same thing, we're all going to want to do the same thing, which means we're going to have one way of working on an issue. And my experience has been in all of these communities that we actually need about 76 to 80, that's not a technical, right ways to do it. We actually need to get going. And so if we have the same analysis, we might do the same action, and then we actually don't move anything. And then finally, we tend to should all over each other, right? Like that's what we do. Like, you should do this, you should do that, we should do this. Like, we do a lot of shoulding. And instead, we have to find what we're willing to do. I have a good friend in asset-based community development, Mike Green. He says, everyone will tell you what should happen. You need to find out what people are willing to do. And so that's what becomes important. No matter if I think the 5 steps to shifting child welfare in Sweden are, if the people who are doing the work, who have to do it on the ground, don't want to work on those 5 steps, it actually doesn't really matter how well thought through they are. I used to be on a board for an organization called the Berkana Institute, and one of their mottos was start anywhere, follow it everywhere. And that is this kind of approach to change. It actually doesn't matter where you start if you start where people have passion and interest and are willing to get to work together, because that will move all sorts of ways that you could not imagine, right? And so get started, right? Let's do it. We've got more than enough to do. There is more than enough work. We will not run out. Let's just get started. And so when we think about sharing work or collaborating for today, right? They just really want to come back, these two. When we think about that, there are kind of 3 key considerations I want to talk with you about today. The first is we need to shift the way we engage other people. Right? We're going to talk about that. For sure, if we want to collaborate differently, we need to shift how we engage people. We need to shift the ways we're thinking about equity and power in really intentional ways. Right? We need to engage those 2 issues in different ways. And we need to shift the way we engage ourselves. Right? It can't all be outward engagement. Some of it has to be inward. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, those 3 things. How do we shift how we engage others? How do we shift the way we engage equity and power? And how do we shift how we engage ourselves? So, obviously this is a fox and a chicken. They had to do a lot of work to get to where they got to in this picture, right? This was probably years of foundation laying before they were willing to snuggle up to each other, okay? Right? So part of what I want to say is it's not quick work. I want to go back to that municipalities work because I think it's really important and it could be key to share here because part of what's happening in that work, and again, this is to modernize municipalities, is that the rural-urban divide is quite strong, right? And that has been part of what's kept the structure from moving forward in a way that will benefit rural communities. And so in this particular project, we have a fox, which is the federal or the provincial government, right? And then we have a couple of chickens there. We have the Association of Politicians, and we have the Association of Town or Village Administrators, right? Different levels of power, right? They have been litigating at times against each other, right? They certainly have had times when the fox has turned around and bitten the chicken pretty hard, right? That's the legacy that we're coming into with that particular project. And yet they're saying for the future, for all of our survival, we actually need to work together. So they're coming in with unlikely friends, right? The other thing I want to say about this is the fox never says, I don't know why the chicken didn't come into my meetings, right? Like the fox knows, right? Like there's a good reason the chicken isn't coming to your meetings, right? So for us to kind of continue to say when we engage other people, I don't know why they're not coming. Well, conditions aren't right for them to come, right? So then we need to think deeply about what are the conditions we're setting, what is the power we're holding, and that gets us more into power, right? But it is insufficient for the fox just to say like, I tried, they didn't come, right? We have to meet people where they're at. That's part of engagement, right? And then finally, let's be clear, the chicken is taking a much bigger risk here than the fox. And that's what we're asking when we engage other folks, right? Often, especially when we come from an organization and invite people to our table, they're taking a much bigger risk to be there. They might be risking their social capital, right? They might be risking, I was at a meeting last week with different stakeholders, and one of the women pulled me aside and said, you need to understand I'm the laughing stock of my community for being here, for trusting you guys with this. She's like, so we better make this real or I'm going to be laughed out of my community, right? So there's risk when we engage other people, and it's worth knowing that. So when we talk about shifting the way we engage others, we need to think about the usual suspects. You will never hear me say that we need less people at the table, right? Ugh, I don't know how that keeps happening. We need the usual suspects. We need people who are used to being in the system and moving things. And we need to go beyond that. Absolutely. Usual suspects is insufficient. They're needed but insufficient, right? So when we talk about collaborating for today, right, usual suspects and beyond. And I like to say, like, who do you want to invite? And then I ask people, well, who else? I usually ask, who are you afraid to invite, right? And usually people will kind of like, there is that one or two people, or, that particular group. I'm not saying, we still have to be strategic. I'm not saying you have to invite them to your first meeting so they can torpedo it, but I am saying you need a plan to engage them in a real and meaningful way, right? There is no a way. This is one of my favorite quotes from some friends of mine in Mexico. And my friend Aaron was like, I don't know, we just throw people away, but there is no a way, right? Like, we're all on one planet, and especially in towns, like, they're still there, right? There's no a way for people, right? And so we need to stop acting as if people are disposable. You did something at my meeting 10 years ago, or you did something at my meeting last week, and I don't like you, and so I'm not going to invite you anymore, right? Again, I'm not saying don't use your judgment. You don't have to invite everyone all the time to everything. That's called the tyranny of inclusion. But we do have to stop throwing people away. People will make mistakes. People will get on our nerves. We have to invite them anyway. And sometimes in these long-term complex issues, shifting the economy of an entire town, for example, we're not necessarily going to get there in our 6 months of meetings. And so we need a different way to look at how we move toward resolution. And one of the things that we're finding is that relationship is one of those resolutions. If we can stay together, that is part of the resolution. If we cannot fragment and splinter off and move into camps, that is actually a successful resolution. We may not have shifted the economy, and it's not that we're not still going for that, right? But that kind of thing, that's like, those things are years away. And so the short term is that we stayed together. And make no mistakes, and I said this earlier in the workshop, is relationships equal results, right? So you can get good short-term results and trample all over each other, but those aren't sustainable and they won't last. These two things can't be pulled apart. How we are together absolutely influences our results. Relationship is resolutions. And I just want to say, when we talk about shifting the way we engage others, there's a fundamental shift in belief towards trusting others' creativity and their commitment. Instead of believing like we're the one person who cares about this. And look, most of us don't actually kind of consciously think that, but often we act in that way as if we're the only person who has real care and commitment to this. And so when we engage others differently, right, that means we automatically let loose a little bit. We trust their creativity and commitment, right? And so I was talking to someone earlier, and this word buy-in comes up a lot. How do I get people to buy in? Like I care about this community, and I got things I want to do, and how do I get them to buy in? And I think we get them to buy in by listening to what they want to do. Not what we want to do, but what they want to do. And part of listening to what people want to do is trusting that they can maybe say things different from us, that they're going to be just as committed as we are, that we can actually trust them to take the ball over the line. That's like a sports ball thing, right? So, and sometimes we have to help them do that. But if I start with these are the 5 things you all need to do, and no one wants to do them, maybe I need to listen to the 6 or 7 things they want to do, right? So trusting others' creativity and commitment. And I put that on there not because I think any of us are sitting around going, people are so bad and we don't trust them. I don't think that is actually the way most of us are oriented. I do think it's the way our leadership is rewarded. Our leadership is rewarded when we have a vision and move people toward it, which automatically means we're not trusting other people's creativity and commitment, because we can't. We've got to be the lone wolf, taking it forward and getting credit. So I don't think, for me, that's a structural piece. I don't think most of us kind of inherently don't want to trust people or don't trust people, but I think we're set up to only trust ourselves. We also need to engage differently around equity, right? And so I don't know if you can see these words. But this is a field of penguins. And one of the penguins is singing, "Oh, I gotta be me, I just gotta be me," right? So this is, most people would look at this and say, oh, penguins, look, they're birds and they're black and they're white and they all have a beak, and yeah, this is a group of penguins, they're the same. And this little penguin person is like, no, I am different and you need to see that. I know you see me, penguin, but I am a different kind of person. And so I think it's incredibly important as we engage our communities to know that we are and we are not the same, right? It is, I mean, like for me, this is like something we have to be able to hold as we collaborate with people. There is the truth of our common humanity. That is true. We're all penguins, right? And there is also the truth that our histories, our present, and our projected future will be different based on the different groups we're born into, right? That's just the case. And so if we want to paper either of those things over, if we want to say, oh yeah, we're just the same, if we all just could I'm in groups all the time, so if we just realize what we had in common, we could move things forward. Maybe, but then we lose really important parts of people. And I'm also in groups all the time where they say, well, if you don't see my difference, you don't see me, and we can't even get started. I'm like, well, maybe, but if we don't have anything in common, I don't know where we go, right? And so for me, like, this is the mature adult thing, is to be able to hold two truths. I think it's the physicist Niels Bohr who says, like, the opposite of a fundamental truth is another fundamental truth, right? We are the same and we are different. And with equity, if we ignore that, we get into trouble. When I say equity, because people have asked this, comic books coming up. When I say equity, I'm talking about both visible and invisible difference. So I'm in communities all the time where people say, well, we're actually quite homogenous, right? Like there's not a whole lot of difference here. So these issues of equity don't show up. And then there'll inevitably be people in the group who'll be like, they're so showing up. I don't know why they won't see that we're different, right? And so in your communities, think about the places, even if you want to say we're homogenous, where there is difference. My mother grew up in a small town in Iowa that was 200 families, and 198 of them were Irish Catholic. She likes to say the Szynskis were okay because they were Polish Catholic. But the Howies were neither Irish nor Catholic, and they were shunned by the community, right? There's always people in our community who don't have access. That's how we're built, right? And so when we think about invisible and visible difference, maybe we need to think a little deeper. Where is gender showing up? Where are the folks who are LGBTQ showing up? Where is poverty showing up in your community, right? And this, for us, at least in the hunger work, was a really tough nut to crack because no one wanted to admit they were poor, and no one really wanted to admit that they were poor people. We all wanted to say, like, no, we're in here helping each other, right? Okay. But class is a real deal, man. It's a real deal, and it makes a difference. And folks who have access to enough to eat and places to live have a really different life and a really different perspective than those who don't. So we need to look for visible and invisible differences and engage them. And it doesn't always have to be engaging in a huge group, right? Just to kind of name that, sometimes you have to do in the background work to get people okay to come to your meetings. This takes a lot of work. If we do not engage issues of difference and equity, we are likely making change without making a difference. We can change how everything looks. We kind of shift the deck chairs, but we're still on the Titanic, right? We're still going down. And so if we don't engage with issues of gender or class or sometimes race in your communities, right, we actually are simply rearranging an inequitable system, right? And so we got to work with it. Look, and I can't tell you like what to do because actually we haven't solved the problem of racism or colonialism or sexism in this country. We actually haven't solved it. So sometimes we think we have to know what to do to engage these issues. But my sense of it is like we just got to try because no one's figured it out, right? No one's figured it out, and so at least we can make our best effort. This takes a long-term commitment. When we talk about equity, right? So MLK says the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice, right? This is long-term work. That's why our relationships as resolution become incredibly important. because some of these issues aren't going to shift quickly, right? And then finally, I want you, as you are collaborating with people, it's important to me, I'm like begging and imploring you to see how people are different, right? To look at those fundamental power differentials between us in a meaningful way. But I also want you to let people be more than that identity that they're different, right? And so please see me as a black, white, biracial woman, but also like as a mom and as a runner and as someone who's a consultant and, you know, and like now we all know I hate cheese, right? Like see me like with my whole, right? My whole self, right? For me, that's the only way equity work can stand. Because so it's like first step, yeah, let's see some difference. Second step, let's see the whole person. When we essentialize people down to like that one core different identity, we lose a lot of their richness, right? And so if we say things like, and I've been in work, like the homelessness work, we needed to have people who are formerly homeless and in the work. Like, without a doubt, we shouldn't be building a system without them. And yet, if when they came into every meeting, they were identified as a formerly homeless person, right? Like, that decreases what they can contribute. So please seek multiplicity. Let people be all of who they are while working with their difference. We need to shift the way we engage power. This, of course, is really tied with equity, but I thought it was worth pulling out. So when we tend to think about power, we tend to think about like comic book, like I have the power, right? Like power is this thing that one dude, usually one white dude, has that they're wielding without any integrity, right? Like that's kind of the way we tend to think about it. And so our response is, nuh-uh, the power is mine, bro, right? Like, let me take that back. Let me speak truth to power. Let me tell you how it is. Let me get into the power position, and then I can run things, right? Like, that tends to be like our only response. Look, and I don't think that's a bad response sometimes. I think that's a great response sometimes. I just think it's inadequate, right? Number one, it doesn't talk about the different kinds of power each of us have. I am not suggesting that we actually don't need to evolve our current power structures. I think that we do, and I think to do that, we have to become really skillful at understanding and navigating power, right? It's not enough to just simply say, you're in power, I don't like it, I want some. I'm either gonna take it from you, or I'm gonna make a funder make you give it to me, or all the different things we do around power, right? We have to begin to think about power is not only just having power over someone, we can have power with someone, we can have power on behalf of someone, right? We need to get skillful. For me, we actually really need to get skillful at working with power and not painting with a broad brush. Doggone it. Too many groups I'm in ignore power, right? They think we're doing really good work. This is important. It's the moral, it's the right thing to do. How could people not agree, right? And so they ignore power and they get down the line and they get tripped up, right? In any number of ways. Politics come into play. People in the group say, we've ignored power for too long, and now we're going to tell you about how this power is playing out in the group. Please do not ignore power. Please have conversations. You are in rooms all of the time with people who are funding other people who are supervising other people, groups who, as a group, have more power. We have cross-gender groups. We have cross-class groups. Talk about it, right? You don't have to solve it, but you certainly can't solve it if you're not talking about it. So please don't ignore power. Make it part of your practice. And there's no one way to engage power, right? This is where we have to be kind of ruthlessly strategic, right? And so that means that it's not always going to look pretty, or it's not always going to be how it should be, but it does need to be how it is. Right? And so we need to engage power where power is and how it is. And we also, many of us, especially those of us who work in engagement in an ongoing way, we're really comfortable engaging community. That feels good to us, right? Or we're really comfortable, or we're, pretty good with engaging our peers and our colleagues. And we're not nearly as comfortable engaging up, right? We're not nearly as comfortable engaging those that we perceive or who in reality have more power than us, right? And my sense is, and the work that I'm doing, is until you can get just as curious about those who have more power as those who have less power than you, you're not going to move a whole lot. You're just not. Because just like we know when people come to us in a transactional way, when they, we have resources, we have something they want, it shifts how we respond to them. Folks who have more power in us are exactly the same way. And we've had really good results making systems change when we actually treat people who have more power as if they're real people who have real feelings, who might actually care about something, right? Instead of just people who hold power or just this particular identity, right? It's when we can actually meet them as people that we've started to see things really shift. Finally, so it was shift how we engage others, shift how we engage power and equity, and then shift how we engage ourselves. I work with a leader in the newspaper industry, right, which is an industry that's struggling. And she came to our meetings once and said, "Oh, I get it now. How I show up is what I give permission for. As a leader, how I show up is what I give permission for." Like, yeah. That's exactly right. You can't say, you guys should be collaborating and then not be collaborative yourself, right? You can't say, you all should work well together and then be unwilling to share power in your organizations, right? How we show up is what we give permission for. If how we show up is always criticizing our partners or criticizing the people we serve or criticizing the young people in our community or criticizing, right? Like, then we're going to get that back, right? Because that's what we've invited. And it tends to be how we're rewarded too. So there is a piece about knowing how you show up and understanding the impact of that, right? We actually need to, this kind of change, if we're really going to become rural shapers, as Joe has asked us to do or invited us to do, we have to know ourselves because this is going to be really hard work. And if we don't know ourselves, we're going to do some really wild stuff and think that, and not even notice it. How many times have you been in a meeting where someone just like was ridiculous? I mean, they were just ridiculous. And then they had no idea they were being ridiculous, right? Or they didn't care that they were being ridiculous. It happens all the time. Or sometimes you'd be like, did everybody see that? Did that just happen? Did they just say that, right? That happens a lot less when you know yourself. Right? And so so what I would say is often in the West, we will say things like change starts here and then it goes out. I think that's completely in error and completely linear. And I think change can start here and go out, but we can also be changed by the work we're doing. We can be changed by the relationships we're in. I think what's important is that we are changing in here. Because when we try to only make change out there, we really mess things up. We really mess things up. So, some ways to be engaging some ways to engage ourselves, right? This idea of being present, exactly, I'm going to go back to that Maslow quote, right? Like, not anticipating into the future, not being guilty about what has or hasn't happened, right? But actually being right here, right now, with what's needed. When we work from that place, things shift. We've all been around people who are like, wow, just how they showed up at a meeting shifted things. And often they were really present. They weren't thinking about what they were going to say next. They weren't thinking about 12 steps down the line. They weren't thinking about the argument we got in yesterday. Right? They were present. There's something on the stage here, y'all. A little thing that says yesterday crossed out, tomorrow crossed out, and now in big letters. Now is all we got, right? And if we're moving out of it all the time, whether we're moving into the future or moving into the past all the time, we've actually lost our capacity to act. So we need to engage ourselves and become present. I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about self-care here. I mean, self-care is important, Please do whatever that is that you do to take bubble baths, spa trips. I don't know what your self-care practice is, but I want to be really clear that I'm making a distinction here. When I talk about engaging yourself, I'm talking about a rigorous, disciplined practice for knowing who you are so that you're not fooled by your own hype and the way you think about yourself, right? What are the things you do? I have a good friend who talks about this is, what are the ways you come home to yourself every day? And I want to remind us that coming home to ourselves doesn't mean like a cool, comfortable, wonderful feeling all the time. Sometimes it's a reflection on the day, and this is where I did really, this is where I wanted to be who I was, and this is where I didn't want to be who I was, right? What are your practices for coming home to yourself? And again, these need to be regular, right? It's not like a journal sometimes, right? Or sometimes I meditate, or sometimes I pray, or all of that is really, really good. But to lead this kind of change, you need an ongoing, disciplined, daily practice, right? If you think most of our leading thinkers and the people who move us have some kind of daily practice, and whatever that would be for you. I don't need to tell you what it is. And you need to have a variety of practices, some big, some small. Some are like your daily. You know, I meditate every day, that happens to be one of my practices. It's great. But sometimes I get knocked off my center on a stage. And then what am I going to do? Because I can't say, hold on, guys, I'm just going to meditate for 10 minutes and like pull it back together, right? I have to have other smaller practices. People do things like breath work. I work with a doctor who, before he goes into a surgery room, when he touches the handle, he just pauses and thinks of the patient's name. And then he goes into the room. Our practices for becoming present. They don't have to be big, they don't have to be ongoing, or they don't have to be those kind of small practices you don't have to do regularly, except for when it serves, but you do need some kind of practice to bring yourself present. You want to be that person that people feel better being around, right? And that happens when we're deeply present. So, change is hard. Whew. Man. I don't know what, change is hard and we can't do it alone. We have to collaborate differently, right? And that means that we shift how we engage others. If you've been engaging the same way for the past 5 years, if you've been engaging the same way for the past year, shift it up, right? We have to shift how we're engaging others. We have to shift how we're engaging power and equity. It has to become an integral part of every bit of our practice, right? Whatever the differences are in your community, and we have to shift how we're engaging ourselves. That's the only way forward. And then, right, folks may want to change with us, or even we have the possibility of changing together. Finally, I don't know if you can read this. Yeah, of course. It's one of my favorite quotes. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. We are living into the future now. How we're going to do it is up to us, but we have to do it together, and we have to do it from a clear space, and we have to do it in ways that invite others in. Thank you so much.